Frank Sinatra would be here tonight, but there was too much excitement, so he called it off.
After making dozens of films, he said people still called him what's-his-name. But then came Kojak. Actor Telly Savalas died of prostate cancer yesterday, one day after turning 70. Edie Magnus has his story.
Telly Savalas, the bald man with a lollipop and a steel gaze, once embodied the spirit of television justice in the 1970s through his role as Inspector Kojak. But that image only existed in front of the camera. Behind the stage lights, Savalas carried a life he never dared to confront. It was a life filled with contradiction, mystery, and shadows that few had the courage to mention. The house where he spent his final years, a ranch-style villa nestled in the hills of Calabasas, was left abandoned for nearly 20 years. No one returned. No one cleaned up. Then, in March 2025, a demolition crew discovered a hidden passage behind the old fireplace. It led to a basement never documented in any official plans. In the corner of the dust-covered room stood a 1970s tape recorder and a worn cassette labeled in shaky blue ink, "To Kojak, you were right." What was recorded on that tape would silence America. Not just because of what it revealed, but because it suggested that Telly Savalas, in his final years, may have uncovered the truth about a murder that was never brought to light. He carried that secret to his grave. It was a promise he never allowed himself to break. So, who was Telly Savalas when the cameras stopped rolling? An actor, an icon, or the last man who ever held the confession of a killer? It is time to revisit his life, not through the lens of television, but through what he left behind in the dark. Telly Savalas, born Aristoteles, Savalas was one of the most unforgettable faces in American television during the 20th century. But before he became a symbol of justice as Inspector Kojak, he was once a boy so poor he couldn't afford winter shoes. A teenager who wished for death just to escape his own life. He grew up in a struggling Greek immigrant family in Garden City, New York. The second of 6 children, he lived in a cramped house where arguments over money echoed through closed doors. His father was a harsh alcoholic barber. His mother was tough but loving. She worked long hours to keep the family alive. His childhood had no music, no toys, only the sound of a crackling radio during the evening news and the faint smell of cigarettes drifting through a cold kitchen. He was a boy surrounded by smoke and suspicious stares. A child too shy to defend himself, often bullied at school, yet stubborn enough to fight back when cornered. As a teenager, he escaped poverty by sitting for hours in the public library reading philosophy and writing poetry that no one ever read. One day, after a family crisis, he left home and enlisted in the army during World War II. It was not out of patriotism. It was the only way he could escape a life that was slowly suffocating him. After returning from the war, Savalas found work in broadcasting. He started as a coffee runner and overnight assistant at ABC. He had no acting background and none of the traditional looks of a Hollywood leading man. His voice was deep and rough. His appearance was hardened by life, but somehow he made people stop and look. One day, during a staff shortage, he was asked to fill in and read the news. Within minutes, his voice, raw and strangely captivating, caught the attention of everyone listening. It opened a path he never expected to take. From small television roles, he gained recognition for playing a killer in Birdman of Alcatraz in 1962. That role earned him an Oscar nomination. After that, he moved to the big screen, often portraying generals, villains, and police officers. These were roles he had never studied for, yet he inhabited them fully with every glance and movement. Then, in 1973, fate stepped in. CBS invited him to audition for a new crime drama. The role was a Greek-American detective. It wasn't the lead, but Telly walked into the audition room, shaved his head, put a lollipop in his mouth, and transformed into Theo Kojak from the very first moment. He didn't need to read a script or act out a scene. The character was already alive within him. That moment changed everything. Inspector Kojak, with his bald head, long coat, sandpaper voice, and piercing stare, was more than a role. He became the symbol of a man shaped by the coldness of life, now using that same coldness in the pursuit of justice. The phrase, "Who loves you, baby?" spread across America and became a cultural slogan. Children shaved their heads to look like him. Adults began to believe that justice could come from someone like them. Tough, raw, but unbreakable. Kojak ran for 5 seasons, won an Emmy, and turned Telly Savalas into a national icon. Everywhere he went, people called him Kojak. The press hailed him as the last true television cop. A man who had once starved, who had been beaten down, who had carried dreams that others laughed at, now stood as a voice for honesty, for justice, and for all those the world had cast aside. To millions of Americans, Telly Savalas was a television hero. He was the embodiment of integrity, loyalty, and an unshakable spirit against evil. But when the cameras stopped rolling, he did not return to his family or go in search of justice. He disappeared into hotel rooms hidden deep in the cold corridors of Las Vegas, where women who once loved him entered his life like passing guests and left without a single goodbye. His first marriage to Catherine Nicolaides was once praised as a classic Greek love story. They were married in 1960 at a small candlelit church in Queens, back when Telly was still a shadowy figure without any fame. Catherine believed in the vows he whispered on their wedding night, believed in the fiery gaze he gave her inside their modest 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor where the sink was always clogged. The tiles were cracked and the paint peeled from the walls every winter. She gave birth to their daughter Christina during a season so cold that the oil heater ran all night and still could not quiet the baby's cough. Catherine endured it all with one belief, that the man she loved wherever he went would always come back. But he did not. When his first role arrived, Telly began claiming he had to sleep on set. As his fame grew, he began sleeping in other rooms. The apartment in Queens gradually fell silent, filled with unanswered letters, unpaid medical bills, and worn-out children's shoes left by a rain-stained window. Christina learned to walk without her father, learned to speak without him, and by the time Catherine received a photograph from a friend showing Telly stepping out of a hotel in California hand in hand with a strange woman, the closet had already been emptied. No farewell letter, no wedding photo, not even a note. As if the marriage had never existed. As if the woman who once shared instant noodles with him on stormy nights had become nothing more than an old speck of dust on an untouched wooden table. Sally Adams didn't know any of this when she entered his life. She wasn't a movie star, not a model, never appeared on magazine covers. She worked in journalism. She sat behind the camera. She took notes. She edited. Quiet and unnoticed. They met at a charity fundraiser for children in Manhattan, in a walnut-paneled ballroom filled with soft yellow light, white wine, and distant piano music. Telly told her about his childhood without a bed of his own, about freezing nights in Queens, about once believing he would die forgotten. She believed him. She fell in love not with the man on television, but with the man who smoked quietly on the balcony and recited Greek poetry in a hoarse voice that smelled of tobacco and doubt. They lived together for nearly a decade. No wedding, no legal tie, but long enough for Sally to believe she was the only one. She gave birth to his daughter Ariana and wrote letters to his mother in Greece, signing them as the woman of your son. In a small apartment in Santa Monica, Sally hung family photos on the wall. She arranged her child's schedule around Telly's filming, waited for him each night with a warm meal. While she planned a peaceful life, he planned a new beginning. Julie Hovland, a young woman in the travel industry, came into his life like a fresh spring that swept away the remnants of an unfinished winter. They met in London during a film promotion tour. Julie was 33 years younger than him. Her blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and light voice made her look like glass. She believed every word he said. When Julie became pregnant, Telly never returned to Santa Monica. One morning in early June, Sally opened the closet and found it empty. A full ashtray remained on the table beside a folded tabloid. The entertainment page read, "Telly Savalas appears with mystery woman at London event. No letter, no message, no call." Sally sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. The room was silent, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Her 3-year-old daughter sat beside her and asked, "Is Daddy coming home today?" Neither of them knew they would never see him again. Ariana never received a birthday call from her father. No photographs, no public mention. When she entered first grade, a classmate asked, "Is your dad really Kojak?" She didn't know what to say. She only remembered him holding her once inside a bakery in Westwood when she was too young to remember his face clearly. When she asked her mother why he never came back, Sally simply closed the curtain. The afternoon light fell across the dusty family photo of the three of them. It had never been taken down. Julie was different. Julie was perfect for the media. They married in 1984 at a luxury hotel in Las Vegas. Crystal chandeliers cast light onto her pure white wedding dress, and every moment was documented by the press. They had 2 sons, Christian and Nicholas. From then on, the family that Telly spoke of in public was only those 3. In interviews, in biographies, in every tribute show, there was no mention of Catherine, no mention of Sally, no Christina, no Ariana. When asked about his daughters, he avoided the question. When asked about the women from his past, he smiled faintly and changed the subject. And when pressed about his first marriage, he shrugged and said, "People drift apart when they're no longer on the same frequency, as if love were a radio signal. One wrong turn of the dial, and an entire life could vanish without a trace." He had 7 children, but Telly Savalas rarely spoke publicly about fatherhood. In interviews that ran for hours, he would talk in depth about acting, about Greek philosophy, about growing up poor. But there was never a space for memories with his children, as if being a father was a role he never played long enough to feel familiar. Ariana, his daughter, with Sally Adams, was nearly 30 years older than Christian, his youngest son, with Julie Hovland. They shared a surname, but not a world. One child knew she had been forgotten. The other appeared with him at award ceremonies, introduced as the pride of his final years. In the press photos, Christian and Nicholas wore suits and stood beside him before the cameras. Ariana and Christina, the first two daughters, remained names left out, buried in faded birth certificates tucked away in an old drawer. For years, the children of Telly Savalas did not meet. No shared birthdays, no complete family photo, no dinners around a table with the man who once preached morality to the nation through a television screen. Someone once asked Christina if she ever watched Kojak. She smiled, faintly shook her head, and said, "I don't like watching people perform something they didn't live." Telly's absence from his children's lives was not caused by dramatic arguments or public breakups. It was born from a cold silence, quiet, as underground ice melting slowly. No explanations, no calls on Christmas Eve, no belated birthday gifts, just nothing. Julie, his final wife, once said in an interview that Telly loved his sons very much, but she did not mention his daughters. No one asked further, and no one followed up. Once in a brief article for a Greek magazine, Telly wrote, "The hardest part is not raising children. It's living in a way that they don't learn the wrong things from you." No one knew if it was a confession or a late warning to himself. When he passed away in 1994 from complications related to prostate cancer, the funeral was quiet. Those who attended belonged to the final family. But the ones who did not, the children who had never touched the emotional legacy he left behind, were the silence that clung to the name Savalas, like a fracture that would never heal. Telly Savalas died on January 22, 1994, just one day after his 72nd birthday, from complications caused by prostate and bladder cancer. He did not pass away in a luxurious villa or a state-of-the-art hospital, but in a high-floor room at the Sheraton Universal Hotel, a place he had called home for over 2 decades. That hotel was not just a temporary residence. It was part of his rhythm. From slow morning walks down the red velvet corridors through the grand lobby where the sound of piano gently echoed, to the late nights spent alone with a glass of cognac at the ground floor bar. That bar was eventually renamed Telly's, as a quiet acknowledgement that he was not just a regular guest. He was the heir of the place, a presence that needed no entrance to be noticed. There was something deeply fitting, something unmistakably Savalas, about taking his last breath just a few hundred steps from Universal Studios, the heart of American television for generations. From that very location, the image of the bald inspector with a lollipop and penetrating eyes had spread across America. And it was from that very place that he quietly exited the stage. No final lines, no camera, no music, only the dark beyond the window and the sound of a respirator cutting in and out inside a room where no one else remained. Telly's funeral was held at St. Sophia, Greek Orthodox Cathedral, solemn and glowing with candlelight, echoing prayers in the ancient language he once heard from his mother as a boy. It was not only a ceremony, it was the final naming of a man who had wandered all his life, spoken in the voice of his origin. There was no official order of arrival, but they all came. Julie Hovland, his final wife, walked silently beside her 2 sons, carrying the calm of a woman who had lived many years under the shadow of a legend. Gus, his older brother, who had stood by him since they scraped snow off the steps of their childhood home in Garden City, sat in the front row, eyes distant. Catherine Nicolaides, his first wife, was also present, accompanied by their daughter Christina. No one spoke much, but their gazes held no bitterness. only the quiet emotion of a life cycle finally closing. Just behind them stood Sally Adams and Ariana, no flowers in hand, no visible tears. But they were there, with the red eyes of a woman who had spent years in the shadows finally stepping into the light to say goodbye to someone who never said goodbye. That day's visitors were a snapshot of classic Hollywood. Angie Dickinson, Don Rickles, Frank Sinatra. People who had called him a friend, a rival, a legend. A young Jennifer Aniston came with her father, John Aniston, Telly's longtime friend. A few old castmates from Kojak, like Kevin Dobson and Dan Fraser, bowed their heads quietly. No one gave long speeches. They came not to speak, but to acknowledge. After the service, Telly was laid to rest in the George Washington section of Forest Lawn Memorial Park, alongside many other legends. A simple stone marked his grave. No lollipop, no slogan, no title, just his name and the year he was born, the year he died. A silence so hauntingly beautiful for a man who had lived too loudly in performance, but too quietly as a human being. Nearly 30 years after Telly Savalas passed away, the villa where he spent his final years in Calabasas still stands. Silent, cold, and sunken under time like a stranded ship that no one remembers. The iron gate is rusted and bent. The nameplate has no letters left. The front wall is cracked like the dry skin of a forgotten memory. Each window is a dark hollow, wrapped in cobwebs reflecting not light, but utter abandonment. This was once a house with a guard, a place where the kitchen glowed with fire, where a man in a suit stepped into a car every morning. Now it is only a shell. For nearly 2 decades, no one returned. No relatives, no lawyers. No one came to claim anything from the place that was once home to the man America called Justice. In early 2025, a real estate survey team was sent in to clear the site before demolition. While removing debris behind the ground floor fireplace, where bricks had apparently been sealed by hand, they found a narrow oak door. Behind it was a small passage leading to a basement nowhere on the floor plan, not listed in any legal file. The basement was damp and cramped. The smell of rust burned the eyes. A flashlight swept across the corners, revealing old stains on the walls, deep cracks in the concrete floor, and rotting stacks of magazines. But in the far corner behind a collapsed bookshelf was something no one expected. A 1970s tape recorder coated in dust. On the table lay an old cassette. Its label had turned a faded brown. Written in shaky blue ink were the words, "To Kojak, you were right." At first, they thought it was a film prop. But when someone managed to hook up power and press play, slowly the sound that came through made the entire basement fall into stillness. It was a man's voice, hoarse, broken, and breathless. A voice that once knew how to command, now trembling like someone confessing in his final hour. He didn't say his name, but every word fell from his throat like a piece of a soul unraveling. I didn't mean to do it. I was afraid of what she'd say. I didn't want to lose everything. So I did what I never imagined I could do. She didn't deserve to die, I know that, but I didn't think anyone would understand. Except you. You were the only one who ever looked at me and really saw me. Kojak, you were right. Everything I tried to hide, it killed me in the end. If you're hearing this, then I've already crossed the point of no return. There was no gunshot, no scream, only shaky breaths, the sound of crumpled tissue, and the slow collapse of a soul falling apart in the dark. But the greater question beyond the confession was why this tape was here, in a hidden basement, in the home of a man known to the world for playing justice. It was never sent, never destroyed, never delivered to a police station or a lawyer. It was just kept in a decaying room, silent for 30 years. No one knows if Telly ever heard it. No one knows if he hid it to protect someone, or because he knew the truth within it could never be allowed to surface. Did he keep it as a suspended verdict, waiting for someone worthy to judge, or was he the only one who ever could? Perhaps throughout his life, Telly Savalas never truly stepped out of character. Even when the lights went out, when the audience moved on, when the people he loved quietly walked away, he still carried the lollipop, the icy stare, and the question that never found its answer. Who will stand for the truth people remember him as a symbol? But beneath that symbol was a man full of contradiction, loneliness, and mistakes he could never undo. A great man, but not necessarily a good one. Thank you for staying with us on this journey into the truth behind a legend. If you feel this story still holds something left unsaid, share your thoughts below. Because sometimes the truth is not found in what is spoken, but in what we choose not to forget. We'll see you in the next story.